Hello, welcome back. So today I want to talk about Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage. I finished this a couple of days ago, and I was really very impressed by this. I didn't expect to like this book, to be completely honest. I thought that it would be sort of your run-of-the-mill coming-of-age story. Boy goes off to war and comes back a man type thing. I've heard about this for years, and I just always expected it to be that way. I think because it was written in the late 1890s or the mid 1890s, and by Stephen Crane, who at the time was only, I believe, 24 years old. And so I didn't expect much from this, and I was wrong to think that because this is a much, much better novel than I expected, and it is not a run-of-the-mill coming-of-age story at all. Now, it is, in a way, a coming-of-age story. I think that he's probably somewhere around 16 or 17, although we're never really given an exact age. He's called the youth throughout. He is referred to as the youth by Stephen Crane, but his name is Henry Fleming, and he's joined the Union Army against the wishes of his mother, and he is now coming up on the verge of his first battle. And so we're not told which battle it is, and I think that was a good choice on Crane's part, because it leaves us free of thinking about what's going on with the generals and what we know about history. So we're left out of that aspect of it, and we're very much seeing it just from Henry Fleming's point of view as a private in the Union Army, a 16 or 17-year-old, maybe 18-year-old boy who is he is filled with fear, and he wants to be a hero. He's filled with these ideas of, the Greek heroes of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and he wants to do something great. He wants more than anything not to be a coward, not to run away, not to do anything he's ashamed of. And he has some grand ideas about war. And we get to follow along with him, both from a third person point of view and sort of from his own point of view. And we go through all these feelings he has, from boredom of sitting around in this camp for days on end, weeks on end, thinking, well, when is this going to happen? I came here to fight. I didn't come here to sit here. And the boredom of the men around him, where they're trying to find things to do, getting in fights and arguments and coming up with all these rumors. And finally, the big day shows up. Tomorrow they're going to war. Tomorrow they're going into battle. And he then is filled with the fear of cowardice. He doesn't want to be a coward. And he spends his time being afraid of winding up a coward. And then they go into battle. And it's, they're all pumped up, and yeah, we're finally going to do this. And then the thrill of the fight, the terror of it, the overwhelming nature of being in this sort of battle where they come at each other in these lines, and there'll be Confederates running at them while they're standing there having to shoot at them, and then they break through the line and start stabbing people with their bayonets, and the abject terror. And then, this isn't really a spoiler. It's hard to spoil this book. This is all about battle, and he does get scared and run, and then he feels grateful for being alive, and then he feels shame, and he comes across one of his friends from back home who has been mortally wounded, and we are there with him as he watches his friend die, and the feelings that he has, and the rage he has against this war, against the generals, against the officers, but also he is honor bound by the people around him. He is in the middle of this vast machine where to do anything, to get out of it, to rebel against it, to try to save himself is just not allowed. It's just not possible. You know, he has to go through with this. So he goes back into the battle. And I was really impressed by this. There are not many books from this time period, from the 1890s, or memoirs from the Civil War from a private's point of view. So Stephen Crane, of course, was born later on. He was not a veteran of the Civil War. He was born in 1871, I believe. He died at 29, and he wrote this book when he was 23 or 24. And actual Civil War veterans thought that he had been there. They thought he was a veteran because of this book. And that's easy to see, because the amount of depth the amount of detail that Crane goes into about what they're wearing, what they're thinking, what they're talking about, their feelings, the way they express their fears and their rage and their hopes, and it's like he was there. I mean, that's honestly, it's like Stephen Crane was there, and sometimes it's hard to believe that he wasn't. He'll add in little details like when they first go into battle, they've all opened their cartridge pouches, and the flaps of their cartridge pouches are bouncing around as they move, and describing walls of smoke that are penetrated by these horizontal flashes of light, these as they fire their rifles. And I just thought it was really good. And if you'll permit me, I'd like to read a passage from this book, and it happens to be the one where Henry first comes into battle. The youth stared. Surely, he thought, this impossible thing was not about to happen. He waited as if he expected the enemy to suddenly stop, apologize, and retire bowing. It was all a mistake. But the firing began somewhere on the regimental line and ripped along in both directions. The level sheets of flame developed great clouds of smoke that tumbled and tossed in the mild wind near the ground for a moment, and then rolled through the ranks as through a gate. The clouds were tinged with an earth-like yellow in the sun rays, and in the shadows were a sorry blue. The flag was sometimes eaten and lost in this mass of vapor, but more often it projected, sun-touched, resplendent. Into the youth's eyes there came a look that one can see in the orbs of a jaded horse. His neck was quivering with nervous weakness, and the muscles of his arms felt numb and bloodless. His hands, too, seemed large and awkward, as if he was wearing invisible mittens, and there was a great uncertainty about his knee joints. The words that comrades had uttered previous to the firing began to recur to him. "Oh, say, this is too much of a good thing. What do they take us for? Why don't they send supports? I didn't come here to fight the whole damn rebel army." He began to exaggerate the endurance, the skill, and the valor of those who were coming. Himself reeling from exhaustion, he was astonished beyond measure at such persistency. They must be machines of steel. It was very gloomy struggling against such affairs, wound up perhaps to fight until sundown. He slowly lifted his rifle, and catching a glimpse of the thick spread field, he blazed at a cantering cluster. He stopped then and began to peer as best he could through the smoke. He caught changing views of the ground covered with men who were all running like pursued imps and yelling. To the youth it was an onslaught of redoubtable dragons. He became like the man who lost his legs at the approach of the red and green monster. He waited in a sort of a horrified, listening attitude. He seemed to shut his eyes and wait to be gobbled. A man near him, who up to this time had been working feverishly at his rifle, suddenly stopped and ran with howls. A lad whose face had borne an expression of exalted courage, the majesty of he who dares give his life, was, at an instant, smitten abject. He blanched like one who has come to the edge of a cliff at midnight and is suddenly made aware. There was a revelation. He, too, threw down his gun and fled. There was no shame in his face. He ran like a rabbit. Others began to scamper away through the smoke. The youth turned his head, shaken from his trance by this movement, as if the regiment was leaving him behind. He saw the fleeting forms. He yelled them with fright and swung about. For a moment, in the great clamor, he was like a proverbial chicken. He lost the direction of safety. Destruction threatened him from all points. Directly he began to speed toward the rear in great leaps. His rifle and cap were gone. His unbuttoned coat bulged in the wind. The flap of his cartridge box bobbed wildly, and his canteen by its slender cord swung out behind. On his face was all the horror of those things which he imagined. So that's just a small slice, but Stephen Crane uses really interesting, really powerful imagery. Like there's a scene where they're watching these shells explode in the woods, and he refers to them as the uh, the blooms of war, and just that sort of thing. And it's a really, really good book. I just really enjoyed it, and I was really glad to have read it after after all these years of thinking that it wasn't any good, or not that it wasn't any good, but that it wouldn't be my kind of thing, that it would just be kind of a run-of-the-mill book. And I was completely wrong about that, and I'm very, very happy that I read The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. And I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.